All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to TrueCommerce's EDI Myths Debunked, Uncovering the Truth. My name is Beth Clarkin. I'm the Director of Partner Marketing. We have decided we wanted to make this as interactive as possible while providing you with all 10 EDI myths. So we actually pre-recorded this webinar the other day, and we're going to have two of our panelists on hand to answer any of your burning questions or even just talk with any comments you might have as we go on through the myths. This is going to be a fully packed hour, but I promise it's very exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Tim now.
Beth, can you try resharing your audio?
That's what happens when you're nervous. Share, include sound. I will restart.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in and joining TrueCommerce team as we come together to discuss and debunk some of the most common EDI myths and misconceptions. I'm your host, Tim Murkowski, and today I'm joined by a fantastic panel with over 3 decades of combined EDI and supply chain expertise. Gina, would you like to kick it off by introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, Gina McGlamory, Channel Manager here at TrueCommerce. I'm very excited to be here today, working through some of the most common EDI myths. Great to meet everybody.
Reed, go ahead, jump on in.
Yes, Reed Houston. I'm a channel manager here at TrueCommerce focused on Microsoft Dynamics, and I'm extremely excited about today's webinar.
Chris?
Yep, thank you, Tim. It's great to meet everybody. I've got a lot of experience at TrueCommerce. I've been selling EDI for over 13 years now and focused exclusively on Dynamics integrations we provide.
Fantastic. Thank you, team. And as I mentioned, my name is Tim Murkowski. I'm also one of the enterprise sales executives here at TrueCommerce and focus specifically on our integrations for D365 Business Central. All right, having got introductions out of the way, as we look to dive into this debunking discussion, we ask you, the audience, stay engaged with us. Have a question or a comment, please use that chat box and send it our way. Before we do kick off though, we have a quick poll for you. I'll give everyone about 30 seconds here to submit their answers. All right, well, without further ado, let's jump on in to myth number 1. You don't have a choice when it comes to selecting your EDI provider. Many businesses believe that they're locked in or they're required to work with the EDI provider that their trading partner uses. Some think that switching providers might cause major disruptions, and some think that it's just easier to go with a set list of providers that's put in front of them. And at the end of the day, aren't all EDI providers the same? So what's the difference? Chris, like you mentioned, do you have decades of experience starting from guiding startup organizations only running QuickBooks to now working with some of our most complex customers that run Dynamics F and SCM? I'd love to get your take on this to maybe kick things off for myth number 1.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I think when thinking about this myth, it's important to really take a step back and really understand what EDI is doing as a whole, right? Because EDI is driven by retailers, by the customers that our Dynamics users are going to be connecting with. They want to give the freedom of choice to the vendor community because some vendors use different ERPs. Some vendors are really small and just might need a web portal. Some vendors can be really large and have a lot of moving parts, and they want to manage it themselves internally. So it helps the customer, the end retailer, to have that freedom of choice in the vendor community to keep them happy and not really push into one service provider that could present a lot more risk to that relationship. That's typically what I've seen.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things from my perspective and keeping that in mind too is not all providers are caught from the same cloth, especially when we think about the functionality that they can bring to the end customer. How do they integrate to the specific backend system you're running today? What functionality do they really bring to the table? And can they really serve the level of project that your team's bringing to them? Reed, not sure from your perspective and working with our channel partners if there's anything else you wanted to add around that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it and you think about EDI, it's a standard language for two business systems to be able to integrate, automate, and communicate with each other, right? And not everyone's using the same business system or ERP solution or WMS, you name it. So when you think about it and you think about the myth of both companies, both systems need to be integrated and leveraging the same EDI solution, it doesn't make sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of thinking about this from a standpoint of, do I have to use the provider that my partner uses? Without a doubt, the option is the end customer or that supplier of that trading partner, without a doubt. And I think it's a really good segue to start thinking about myth number two, which is EDI is solely a compliance tool and doesn't really bring business value to the end user of that system. Coming from my experience, without a doubt, the answer is true that there is a regulatory compliance within EDI. To do business with some retailers or some suppliers and vendors, you have to have an EDI tool in place. But to come from a mindset that it's not bringing value to the table for that business just is absolutely not true. When we think about full automation, removing manual entry, also faster fulfillment rates for organizations, those are all positives that can come to the table. Gina, I know you work with a lot of our partners in the Business Central space. Anything else you want to add in from your side of things and thinking about stepping out of this, only thinking about EDI as a compliance and really where full automation and integration can drive value?
Tim, I think it's easy to think of EDI as something you just have to do to keep your big customers happy, kind of like you're checking a box, of course. But when it's implemented well, EDI can actually be a major driver of business value. It takes a little bit of effort, but you can really reduce your manual work and increase accuracy. You can accelerate your order to cash cycle. It frees up your team to focus on more strategic efforts, right? So many companies are beginning to see EDI not just as a technical requirement, but more of an enabler of growth, speed, and better customer experience.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Kind of this myth number two, it's a compliance tool, offers no business value. I think almost kind of goes hand in hand as well with this next myth. So we're kind of going to take it as a 1-2 together here, but thinking about you don't need to integrate EDI with your ERP system. I love that we have the team that we have here today because we're approaching it from so many different angles. And maybe in kind of thinking about you don't need to integrate. Maybe where I'd love to start the conversation around that is with you, Reed, when we think about kind of alluding to some of the things Gina had already talked about, driving efficiency, setting that foundation. Would love to maybe get some of your thoughts initially when we think about what added benefits come when we think about finding that right partner to integrate to your ERP.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to integrate EDI with an ERP system. There are cases where a lot of vendors do have a portal for you to be able to use, like Amazon's Vendor Central, Walmart's Retailing, right? Wayfair's intranet. But whenever you get to a certain volume, it is extremely important to have the right EDI provider to be able to leverage their integration into the ERP solution or Microsoft Dynamics. With that integration, every integration is a little bit different in terms of the EDI provider themselves. Some of them are more, flat file based. Some of them are pre-built, right? Some of them are embedded. Chris, I'm sure you could speak to this. Some of them are embedded or integrated, leveraging the same code as the ERP solution itself, right? So it's extremely important when you're evaluating an EDI provider to understand, although I might be in this state and I might be leveraging these platforms or these different vendor portals, but what's the future state of my business? Whenever I do get to a certain volume and I need to integrate, I want to make sure that I'm lined up with the right EDI provider. And that's not only just integration into the ERP is the benefit, but it's also finding the right provider that can consolidate all of these different portals that you're using under one umbrella or one company. When we think about, do I need to integrate EDI with the ERP system, there's a lot of benefits to that as well. And not to get too technical, but things like item translation, unit of measurement conversion. A lot of that stuff you're doing when you're using a portal and then you're going back into the ERP and you're manually entering that data as a sales order, you're manually going through and you're trying to figure out, Walmart calls my item 123, but in my ERP it's XYZ. There's the capability within a good EDI integration that has the ability to automatically handle those sort of conversions where you don't have to do that manually and worry about, manual error and things of that nature. But that's kind of what I have when you talk about this myth.
Sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And kind of thinking about that, maybe a quick takeaway, and Chris, I know you probably have a couple of things you want to jump in here. Maybe the two things that I really took from that feedback there, Reed, is one, long-term view, right? Not just thinking about where is my organization today, but what are our growth plans, right? And how can we make sure we're selecting the right system to support those growth plans long-term? And then secondly, risk mitigation, right? We all know that with manual entry, manual touch points, whatever it might be within the supply chain process, that there's inherent risk there. And so can you make the right decision to pick the right partner to mitigate that along the way? Chris, we talked about it a few times already, but you're in the weeds right now with organizations that have a lot of complex processes. And so I'd love your input when we think about how this is so impactful. So some of those organizations that are trading with hundreds of partners and are trading thousands, if not millions of documents a year.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to just take a step back and see how the landscape of retail selling has changed over the last decade, right? We're seeing more folks selling product online, more folks selling directly through their own channels. But what that means is us as consumers, you buy the product, you want to get that tracking number right away and see when it's coming. And I get that from an Amazon interface, but that demand is sent downstream to our Microsoft customers. So like Tim, you said, risk mitigation, kind of going hand in hand with growth plans. If you're a manufacturer and you're selling product through retail and you're selling upstream through folks like maybe Amazon, Walmart, the different marketplaces, whether it's stores or online, you're seeing more orders, but you're seeing a demand to respond to those orders quicker. You need to get it into your system. It needs to be acknowledged. You need to get it shipped out the door, and only then can you get a tracking number sent back up to those customers. That piece of it is so critical, and you have to have an integrated EDI solution. And when you look at Dynamics, really honing in on certified integrations that are built for the system and can easily be plugged in to accommodate that workflow is huge. And I think all of us have seen, that's been a trend over the last decade. But when COVID happened, so many more folks were seeing their volume online explode. And that risk of not being able to serve those customers and get those orders in was really challenged by if you have a direct integrated solution or not. The last thing I'd say is, Tim, you mentioned how I'm in the weeds. I had a call yesterday where my potential customer was telling me their volume goes up 18 times in November and December for the last 8 weeks of the year. Being able to have a solution that flawlessly gets those orders and make sure you're getting, your orders processed and sent, but you're not damaging that relationship with those critical customers is huge. That's where an integrated solution can be so critical.
Sure, absolutely. Chris, I think you just nailed so many important things there. And maybe the biggest thing is the provider that you're working with, do they have the certification and backing and true integration with that ERP, right? And I think such a huge benefit is, especially when we're thinking of this from a dynamic standpoint, we are certified for both Business Central and Finance and Supply Chain Management with robust integrations that have been in place for years and years. Gina, anything from your side of thing you want to add in here? And I know we've all kind of gone around the room here, but I think this is such an impactful and important piece to really bring home. So would love to get your thoughts as well.
You all hit it pretty much right on the head. And I think ultimately the risk piece is very important. Every time your team is rekeying data, whether it's an order, an invoice, shipping update, you're adding time and you're introducing risk. So you want EDI to automate that process. You want documents to flow directly into your ERP so you have consistent data across your systems. You get real-time visibility into those orders, into your inventory, your shipments, and really that's what it's about. So I think everything considered, I agree with all of you, and I think it's a core piece of leveraging EDI, in my opinion.
Sure, fantastic. So kind of gone through a few myths here, right? Do you have to use the provider that your partner uses? The answer is no. And then really thinking about, is this just a compliance tool? And is it worth integrating? And I think we've really nailed home that there's so much value and benefit to driving integration with EDI and the value that our customers and prospective customers can find in using a system like TrueCommerce. Kind of a good segue to thinking about, great, I'm using EDI today, but what happens when it takes a long time to get a partner up and running? And hey, TrueCommerce, is there a way that you can make this a much smoother and easier process? I think we understand in the world of supply chain, it's not yesterday, it's we need it now, immediately, right? And so how can we drive a faster process to get partners up and running? Reed, maybe I'll start with you again on this, just kind of from your experience over the years and where you feel like we're at today when we think about being able to align with customers and get them the connections they need set up and running in a timely manner.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. When I think about this, I think about two different scenarios with EDI. Kind of managing EDI in-house, right? Or leveraging a full managed service EDI provider like TrueCommerce. So when you think about setting up trading partners and you're managing EDI in-house, you're in charge of managing the maps of those documents, the mapping of the EDI documents, as well as the updates to those documents. And it's not like whenever you set up a purchase order known as an 850 in EDI with, let's say, Walmart, that you set it up and you forget it. That's not the case, because the mapping of their documents are always changing. Therefore, you're constantly, if you're managing EDI in-house, you need to manage those documents, all the updates. It can take a long time. And if you have a lot of trading partners, you almost have to have a person dedicated to managing the EDI maps themselves. Whereas with a managed service like TrueCommerce, we're managing those on behalf of the customer, right? We're managing the maps, we're auto deploying those maps to the solution itself. Any changes, we notify our customers immediately and we make those mapping updates. So when I think about this myth, I think that's the biggest thing, is kind of focusing on the two different aspects of EDI and the ability to be able to set up trading partners a lot quicker.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of from an actual use case as well. I have a customer who actually signed up with us back in November. They're live and in production now, and recently just signed what will become their largest partner from a volume perspective. Within notifying us that the vendor agreement was in place, we had a resource aligned with them within 24 hours to begin testing. And we're expecting within the next week to have them go through complete compliance testing with that organization. And again, to kind of just emphasize a few of the other things we talked about so far, is what does that new relationship need from a holistic impact to the organization? This customer is expecting to go from 10,000 annual EDI transactions to singularly 6,000 orders a day with this new trading partner. So again, how critical it is to have the right partner with the right integration that can get you set up quickly with that critical relationship. Chris, I don't know if you had anything else from your end and kind of from your experience that you wanted to add in.
I do, and I think it's also important, think about it from the perspective of, our customers, right? Folks that are using Microsoft Dynamics and want to connect to a new trading partner. There's a couple moving pieces that need to happen, right? You have to connect the network, you have to get the X12 EDI maps installed, but then you have to do D365 testing. That's the piece that's really applicable to our customer, right? They're not familiar with what goes into connecting EDI mailboxes or those maps, and that's where a service provider can be so helpful. Those are the EDI specific pieces that we manage, and we do them instantly, right? So setting up a new trading partner, we can get the connection set up, we can get the maps in the system within 24, 48 hours, and that allows the Dynamics user to focus exclusively on the EDI to ERP testing. And we can help lead through that process, but it's important to kind of, as we're talking about speed here, make sure that our customers are focusing on what they're able to do while we can manage all of that EDI specific stuff in the background. Makes it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. 4 myths in at this point. Obviously, from the audience standpoint, if you have questions, comments, would love to have them sent our way so we can answer them as we continue on here. Kind of jumping into this next phase of myths, I think we've set a really great foundation for the importance, like I said before, of finding that right provider, someone who's Dynamics certified and can not only really fit the needs for today, but those future growth opportunities as well. Myth number 5, and I think Gina and Reed might raise their eyebrows a little bit here because it's a constant conversation with so many of our important Microsoft partners that we work with today. But when we think about EDI implementation, should it be left as a phase 2, or is it something important to be met as a phase 1 with an ERP implementation at the same time? I think there's a lot of ways to slice it, but maybe as we look to maybe dive into this myth, Gina, I think I'll pass it over to you first. Would love to get your thoughts on kind of that thought process of, does it make sense for now or to push it off until post go live? And then maybe we can hear from Chris and Reed as well.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm allowed to have a favorite myth, but this is definitely my favorite myth. One I definitely want to tackle today. So it's all about transparency. Okay, partners, when I'm talking to them, they're telling me that providers are giving really aggressive timelines. And I believe in part that's because they're not properly scoping the client's core business needs as they apply to EDI. Go lives are getting delayed, which we know is so painful. And I think, another key point is you lose the opportunity to test your full order to cash or procure to pay process end to end. We've worked with hundreds of customers doing ERP transitions, and the most successful ones treat EDI as core infrastructure. They plan for it, they test it alongside their ERP, and they go live knowing that their entire trading partner network is supported. You wouldn't wait until phase 2 to include GL or inventory, right? So plan ahead. Customers, ask your partners what the path is for EDI when you're looking at new solutions. Partners, lean on experts like Tim and Chris and Reed to help you formulate a plan that works for your customers and even spot potential for greater value. So that's my piece.
Love it, Gina. And I think you hit it 100%, just that clear communication. And we want to support our Microsoft partners as best we can and be an integral part to what is that larger picture of that total ERP implementation. Chris, Reed, anything you guys?
Yeah, Reed, if you don't mind, I kind of want to chime in because I'm hearing some keywords that I was thinking of. Gina, you mentioned transparency, and then Tim, you said communication. And I feel like that's how you get to transparency, is just through communication and having that communication early. And that doesn't always mean that we have to immediately do work at the very beginning of a project, but it's so important to just understand what's the EDI scope of the Microsoft user and what it looks like from an implementation standpoint. Because a lot of the brands that we end up setting up on that are doing a net new implementation with Microsoft that have really big EDI scopes, they're important to the business. And we really don't want to impact those relationships or introduce risk as part of the ERP implementation and EDI integration that goes hand in hand with that. So having a conversation early, understanding the moving parts, that helps everybody involved with this ERP process be on the same sheet of music in terms of when we need to get started so that we can all hit that end date and have a successful go live with as little risk as possible.
Absolutely, 100%. Thinking about all of that as well, and just the collaboration that's involved for the overall migration of the ERP. We're talking a lot about Dynamics FNSCM and Business Central, but we also recognize that there are organizations that are still on some of those more legacy-based Dynamics products, whether it be GP, NAV, even AX in some regards. And it's a constant conversation that we're having today around picking those older ERPs up and moving them to the new modernized version. And so we'd love to be part of that conversation, whether you're a GP user, a NAV user on AX today. Happy to get involved and help kind of discuss how we can help make that a seamless transition from one ERP to that newer, latest and greatest upgrade. Kind of thinking about all these different ERPs and where organizations can be kind of in their overall life cycle as a company, kind of moves us on to myth 6 and thinking about EDI is only suitable for large enterprises. I think it's such a interesting misconception that comes up quite often. Even this year alone, I've had a couple conversations where the same comment has come up a couple times where clients of mine say, we're too small to be considered big, but not big enough. And so we still feel small in some regards. And so sometimes EDI can be a difficult thing to approach for an organization, especially if they're just implementing a full-size ERP for the first time. And I guess my comment to that as a whole is that EDI should be very approachable for your organization. And at TrueCommerce, we have a number of different products and tiers that we can offer our clients to align both from a functional standpoint and a budgetary standpoint as well. And maybe the other thing to add in there when we think about is this something that can be consumable by my organization is, can you start small and continue to grow and excel and add on functionality as you go, or are you locked into things? Chris, I'd love to lean on you a little bit here in thinking about, when is EDI suitable, or do you have to be that big company to be able to make and take full advantage of an EDI solution?
Yeah, you certainly don't. And I think it really comes down to what that business is, right? There's one company that always stands out to me when I think about this, where this was years ago when I sold them. They were a large enough company where they were, they had selected and implemented D365 FNSCM, but they sold salt. They were a small business, privately owned. They were content to sell it on, I think they were only selling at that time from an EDI partner standpoint on Amazon. They sold salt online. They didn't really have ambition to grow, but they did enough volume where we were able to partner and provide them an integration. But this was right before COVID. And when COVID hit, their sales of salt on Amazon absolutely exploded. So it was almost unexpected growth, but from a solution standpoint, all of a sudden their EDI integration was the most critical thing they had. And that really brings me back to just when I'm looking at this myth and thinking, it depends on the company, but if you're doing any type of EDI ordering and you have growth plans, it always makes sense to have an integrated solution. Just from that standpoint that we've talked about on this webinar, is risk. To minimize risk and make sure you're able to roll with any growth that comes your way.
Yeah, fantastic, Chris. And kind of hearing your story, I was kind of reminded of a client of mine in the coffee industry, where they were a startup getting out into the industry first, and they signed their first retail customer. Super excited, ready to go. And we found the right product for them to drive automation and integration. And then all of a sudden their product took off and started selling left and right with all these different retailers. And because they put that right foundation in place, they were able to seamlessly scale, add on those relationships, and not worry about the exciting growth that they were experiencing. Again, so just really emphasizing, whether it be already having that foundation in place for when there is some uncertainty, but still having that strong foundation to support your supply chain operations, or being that early on organization that got that first retail relationship and having the right partner to support those needs. Maybe the other thing that I'll add in there as well is, once you already have EDI set up and running, it opens doors for future conversations. When you can come to the table of that next big customer meeting and say, EDI is a requirement, TrueCommerce is our provider, they're going to recognize the name. And now you're not having to jump through a hurdle to figure out, what is EDI? How do we set this up? You're already off to the races, and it can make that vendor onboarding process for that client go much smoother. Gina, any perspective? Sorry, go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and sorry to cut you off there, Gina, but it got me thinking, everybody that we work with wants to grow. And, this is kind of a hypothetical situation. It never really happens this way, but imagine if it was served up to one of our customers that's using Dynamics on a silver platter. If a retailer came to them and said, I'm going to double your growth in the next year, are you ready for that? And if you have that foundation, like Tim said, and you have that power to go to them and say yes with confidence, that's huge. Instead of needing to kind of turn and scramble to get solutions ready, right? It's a little bit riskier.
Sure, absolutely. Gina, anything from your perspective and what you're seeing in conversations you've been having as of late?
Yeah, so it's, an important point that everyone here has a lot more tenure than I do, but I definitely pick up quickly on conversations that customers are having over and over through the sales cycle. And it's clear that there is this untapped opportunity that every time we get on a call, they say, we really only need it for these trading partners, but we know that there are other customers and partners we can support once we become EDI compliant. So I think I echo everything that you all just said. And really, it's a much more accessible project these days. You don't have to have a massive IT team or a huge budget to accomplish this anymore. And Reed, maybe you could share a little bit about sort of the path customers are taking, a growth path with us. That's something I see a lot, and add a little color there. That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times actually right now I can think of multiple customers. Our biggest volume customers started off getting their foot in the door with a big box retailer, like, for example, a textile importer. Got their foot in the door with Walmart, right? They got their first order when they were mandated to have an EDI solution along with some other retailers that we're doing business with. So therefore, a lot of times it's not, hey, I need EDI right away because of my order volume and the integration. Sometimes it's just a strict mandate compliance, right? But those customers then realize that, hey, EDI has more value than just compliance. Whenever you start adding on things like the integration that we offer into the ERP solution and being able to automate the order, like Chris mentioned earlier, being able to fulfill quicker, meeting order demands. So, some of our largest customers started off as a very small mom and pop, and now are some of the top brands that you see on the shelves of a lot of the big box retailers today.
Yeah, fantastic, Reed. Really love that thought for sure, and maybe an opportunity to get some insight from the audience as well, right? Where do you see EDI fitting in your supply chain today, right? Has it been something that you felt was prohibitive, and more importantly, how has it benefited your organization? And then are there things that you're planning on for 2025 and beyond, where you're saying, hey, we're looking to grow fast, and we need that right partner? Would love to hear from the group listening in here. As we think about, where's EDI the right fit and what makes most sense for organizations, especially as they're running these different platforms in the dynamic space, I think another myth that comes up quite often, Chris, I know you and I run into this quite regularly on conversations we're having with our clients, but the thought process of migrating to a new provider. I think a lot of organizations look at that and say it's really complicated and really risky for our organization. Without a doubt, with 18,000 customers today at TrueCommerce, we recognize that EDI supports some of our clients' largest customers, right? Major revenue drivers for your organizations. And so when we think about not only getting a new trading partner up and running, but picking up an entire EDI footprint and putting it on the TrueCommerce network, it's something that our team has a lot of experience doing, but something we also take really, really seriously. I've touched on this a few times, but I just think it's really important to focus on. Chris, you work with some of our most complex customers with the greatest needs and sometimes the deepest complexities in their workflows. And so understanding those, grasping those requirements, and then delivering on them is absolutely critical to their success. Maybe you can share a little bit around kind of our approach and methodology when we think about how do we scope this out? How do we make this seamless? And at the end of the day, remove that risk factor for customers migrating over to us.
Yeah, definitely. And, Tim, you mentioned how many customers we've had here at TrueCommerce. And it's important to note that anybody we ever onboarded was either brand new to EDI or they were moving from an existing EDI provider. So, when you wrap your heads around that, it's a little bit more common than some folks might think, but we understand that. Because if I've got one of my customers that's on D365 and they're switching, they're evaluating a new EDI provider, it might be the first time they've ever done it. So it feels uncertain, it feels risky to them. But not only is TrueCommerce familiar with this process, but so are the companies that they're connecting with, their customers. And I think that's the piece we want to focus on is the actual retailers themselves that have thousands of vendors in their community. They're constantly seeing folks changing EDI providers, needing to help send EDI data to a new mailbox, navigate that process. They've got departments built for that, and it's something we're very familiar with as well. So, in summary, I think it's something that's a little bit more common that we do see. And the good news is we see the path to kind of mitigating this is some of the things we talked about earlier. Transparency and communication, right? Knowing who your partners are. We know the process to switch from a previous EDI provider to TrueCommerce, but more importantly, get things set up with that D365 system. So it's something we're familiar with, vendors are familiar with, and we can really smooth that over for a customer that's going through this process for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate the detail around that. I might turn it over to you, Reed, real quick. We've touched on this a few times. I think it's an easy thing to say that we wouldn't be the organization we are without the Dynamics partners that we work with, right? Our trusted Microsoft partners, who in turn entrust us with their clients to say, TrueCommerce, we trust your platform, your organization, and your solution to deliver on the needs of our clients. And maybe you could just kind of elaborate a little bit on the conversations you're having with our partner community and how we can really, again, provide that seamless migration as our partners are working with their clients.
Yeah, Tim, a lot of our partners, where we see the evaluation phase of EDI come into play is a lot of times when they are upgrading or migrating from one ERP to another, whether that's from NAV to Business Central, whether that's GP to BC or finance and supply chain management. A lot of our partners, when they're engaging us for EDI, they're already using EDI today, and they're migrating, right? Where we see the most action, where we see the most communication with our partners is whenever there's that migration, because they're typically evaluating all the ISVs that they're using today, right? The partner is going to come to the customer and say, hey, listen, what's working, what's not working. Here are the suggestions that I have out of the box. This is what I recommend. They recommend TrueCommerce, and that's whenever we see a lot of those opportunities to evaluate, our product migrating from a different EDI provider. Most of our partners, after they've worked with us for a while, they understand that it's not complicated. It's really not risky because of the way that we handle it. We have that sandbox environment where we're able to do a lot of the testing for that migration behind the scenes. And the customers, the trading partners, don't even know that they're switching ERPs or different EDI providers at the beginning. There's really not that risk there. The only thing that we're focusing on with the partner or with the trading partner is going to be whenever we're done with the testing, everything's validated, they're trained on the solution, and it's as simple as reaching out to that trading partner or that retailer and switching the EDI IDs. So there's no orders are flowing into the new EDI platform, the new EDI network compared to the old one. There's really no risk for the customer itself. So, a lot of times when we're working with partners, for the first time, they don't understand this, but most of our top Microsoft partners, after a few migrations, they totally get it, and they're able to help send that message to the customer to understand that, hey, listen, guys, although you're not familiar with it, maybe you've never did a migration before, it's not that complicated, and TrueCommerce will take care of you.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think we kind of have the same couple of words revolving around here as we continue to debunk these myths, especially from a standpoint of how TrueCommerce comes into the equation here. Transparency, communication equals risk mitigation. And I think it's something that our teams really focus upon here because, like I said before, we recognize that the connections we're providing for our customers are some of their largest customers, and how critical it is that we maintain that connectivity. Kind of moving along here to our eighth myth, and we're almost through here, guys. So stay buckled in, and we appreciate everyone's insight so far, and maybe from the audience here in thinking about, are you planning a migration? What are things you're concerned about? Would love to hear from you around that. We recognize that as the years go by, technologies improve, things change, and you have to be able to adapt and be agile. And I think we can all agree that moving into myth number 8, having real-time data connectivity and responsiveness is so important, whether it be data throughput, order fulfillment, inventory updates. And I think there's a little bit of a myth out there that EDI can't support it today. It lacks the agility. And without a doubt, we recognize that some organizations are shifting to APIs, and we're going to get to that in a little bit here. But I think what I want to focus on here, again, is circling back to, are you putting in the right foundation with the right integration to support throughput to your ERP? coming from my exposure to the Business Central side of things, especially for clients that are moving from NAV or GP, some of those more on-premise based solutions, sometimes ERPs have gotten overly customized and complicated, which is why they haven't been able to upgrade. And I think one of the values that we bring into the integration with Business Central today is the fact that it's a very light touch print within the ERP. So then when we think about an organization that's driving a lot of volume, maybe it's 10,000 orders a month, if not more, we can easily support that because it's a direct integration and we're not taking up a lot of bandwidth in the ERP. So it allows for fast data throughput. In fact, we have some customers on Business Central today that trade with over 200 trading partners individually. So just having that confidence that you can either push data into the ERP or pull inventory updates, get shipping notifications out in a timely manner, again, to support those vendor scorecards is something that we recognize. Chris, I think I'm going to turn this to you here because I know when we think about data throughput and connectivity and communication, especially for some of our customers running Dynamics FNSEM, it's a major conversation. So I'd love to maybe get some thoughts from your side of things when we think about data, agility, and really meeting those real-time needs.
Yeah, and this is a really good myth. It's a really good question. And I commonly see this with a lot of my customers that we've set up who sell online, where the retail demands can be pretty sharp, right? They'll send an order to our customer and they want that order to be acknowledged back to them in under 4 hours. Because remember, if we're ordering that product and we're ordering it and we want to get that tracking number, we want it right away. But it takes that downstream and upstream process that our customer that's using D365 is completely responsible for. But from their standpoint, they can't do anything to acknowledge an order until it's in the ERP. So when I think about my FNSEM customers, where we've got our certified integration, it's embedded in the ERP, we're responsible for receiving that data, translating it, getting it into D365 so that we can vet some of that data, right? Is the price right? Do we know this item, this customer, where are we shipping it to? That allows the D365 user to be able to acknowledge it as quickly as possible. And like Tim said, when you think about the product, right? A certified solution that you've heard us talk about a couple times, that's where this is really important. Because specifically with what we provide, when you look at Microsoft, the typical API protocol is through OData. And when you get high volume spikes, OData can be throttled. Those API calls can be throttled by Microsoft. We don't use OData. We've got a custom code package that allows us to bypass that throttling. So whether I'm getting 1 order in an hour, 10,000 orders in an hour, more, that data's coming in, I've got it in D365 in minutes, and the user doesn't have to be worried about the time, the ticking time clock on their end to acknowledge it back. The orders are there, they can do their work and make sure that the customer is happy. Both customers are happy, right? The retailer and then us who are ordering the product who want to actually put that tracking number.
Sure, 100%. And kind of thinking about this, right? We also recognize not every customer of ours only has one trading partner, right? I talked about some that have over 200. Chris, I know you've had projects where we're talking about 50, 60, 70, 80, maybe even a couple hundred trading partners.
Sure.
We also recognize that the level of automation or the timing for each of those relationships might be a little bit different. And so we have the power to be able to put in certain settings and rules specific to each relationship. So maybe one relationship you're saying, hey, all invoices are going to go out once a day at the end of the day. But to your point, Chris, maybe there are some relationships that within a certain time frame, data needs to be acknowledged, inventory reports need to go out, shipping notifications need to go out as quickly as possible. And so it's that flexibility to be able to adjust, but also still align to each of your customers' specific requirements. Gina, anything you wanted to add in, just kind of thinking about real-time data exchange and driving process for our customers?
I really want to hear from Reed on this one because I feel like he has a lot to add here.
Awesome. Reed, what you got, man?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Chris kind of hit the nail on the head with this one. A strong network for an EDI provider is extremely important. There's multiple different ways that you can manage EDI, whether you're outsourcing it to a third party or whether you're handling it with TrueCommerce, who has everything in-house from the network to the integration. But the most important is the ERP that we're integrating with and the network and the connectivity of that network and being able to handle, like Chris said, the high throughput. Because a lot of times the solutions out there, the way that they integrate with the ERP, there are issues around high throughput. We see it every single day whenever we talk with some of our opportunities out there. So again, piggybacking off of what Chris said, it's very important whenever you are evaluating an EDI provider to help them understand, what do your order volumes look like, whether that's inbound orders, that could be outbound orders, or we can talk about warehouse documents, right? Sending orders to a 3PL or a third-party warehouse if you're outsourcing fulfillment. So it's extremely important to have that sort of detail and that data to be able to provide to your EDI provider so that they can make sure that they can support your volumes.
And
Awesome.
one extra wrinkle I do want to mention, Tim, before we move on, is we've talked a lot about agility, right, in terms of getting an order, acknowledging it. But people that are listening to this or, that are familiar with EDI and have maybe a larger footprint know that agility really can apply to managing exceptions, right? I used an example of 10,000 orders an hour. If they all come in flawlessly, fantastic. But what we typically see is some of those orders might have a different price than what you have in the system. There might be a new item that's not in D365 yet, or an address that you're not familiar with. The ability to catch those exceptions, bring them in front of a user, a business user who knows how to manage them, right? And be able to rectify and kind of get that sorted out, understand if you want to accept that price, if you want to push back, the ability to see that and act on it is very important as well. And I know we've talked about certified solutions on this call, but this is where that really shines, is how does a solution manage that? What does it look like from a user standpoint? And understanding that can really give you confidence that you could handle some of those volumes.
No, that's fantastic, Chris. And I love that you just brought that up as kind of the last point in thinking about that agility and supporting data needs, because it is just the perfect transition to myth number 9. And that's that EDI is this one-time setup and doesn't require ongoing attention. I love this myth. And I think this myth and the next one are my two favorite that we'll go through in today's conversation. But Chris, you already hit on so many important things. I think it's one, let's start with this foundation that we've built around EDI, right? Can it directly integrate to my ERP, Business Central, FNSCM? How well does that integrate? Additionally, once it's up and running, where's the visibility to all the data? Does it have to go through a bunch of massaging behind the scenes and now our customers no visibility to where data is going? If there's an error, how do we handle that error, right? And so I think while as a managed service provider, TrueCommerce is maintaining that integration for our customers on their behalf. We're maintaining all those trading partner requirements and mapping specifications and how we connect into them. We also find it's critically important to make sure that we empower our customers with the tools to be able to jump in, like you said, Chris. What happens when one of those 10,000 orders isn't right, or 2, or there's item translation issue or data validation issue? Are they constantly having to dig and chase with no avail on how to actually fix that issue? Or is it simple, easy to find, and quick time to resolution? And so maybe, Chris, I'll pass it back to you one more time if there's anything else you wanted to add in thinking about some of the internal maintenance, if you will, or just touch points that our customers find super helpful in thinking about running an EDI platform day to day.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm going to hone in on one of the words I heard you say there, Tim, which is keep it simple, right? And maybe I'll give a specific example that we see a lot with EDI is a price exception. And especially for some of my, FNSCM customers, where maybe their relationships with retailers allow them to have a lot of different promotions based on the time of year, based on different products, that can lead to errors, right? Where the price comes in and it's different. And think about that extra layer to this kind of situation. If I, as the EDI provider, catch that and see there's a different price, I'm not the one who's really choosing what price to use. It's more important to catch that error, get it in front of the Dynamics user in a way that they can read it and understand so they can make a choice on what to do as quickly as possible. And when we say simple, I'm going to go back to that term because a lot of times with EDI integration, you might hear the term a middleware. And the middleware exists to help facilitate the integration with an ERP. But when we look at what we can provide for a system like D365 FNSEM, we don't have really a middleware. Our integration bundle is installed directly in the ERP, which, what does that mean to the user? If I see a price exception or a price warning, hey, the price is different, what do you want to do with it? I see that in Dynamics, I can act on it in Dynamics, and I never leave the ERP. The alternative is leaving that ERP, going into a middleware, having to choose, resend the data. It's not as simple. It gets the job done. But when we're talking about thousands and thousands of orders that could lead to bulk exceptions, bulk warnings, we want to be able to, empower customers to manage those as quickly as possible. Staying in the ERP is the best way to do it.
Yeah, Chris, I love that. And when we think about something really important you threw out there was how is it integrating? And you threw out this term middleware. And something that I think we're also proud of here at TrueCommerce is the fact that we've taken it upon ourselves to get certified by these ERP developers, Microsoft in this case, to get certified and create a direct integration to those ERPs. And so that what that means, like you had just said, EDI data comes into the TrueCommerce platform and it's a direct touch point from TrueCommerce right to the ERP, meaning there's not this extra link in the chain, if you will, in regards to creating that connection. Because what does that do? When there's an error, well, where do we check for the error? Is it an ERP error? Is it an EDI error? Is it a middleware error? Throws up a lot of questions. And something that kind of came to mind for me is a new client of ours running Business Central today. And on their previous provider, where they needed a middleware to integrate into Business Central, they had a scenario where at the end of the day, they had to send 20 ASNs. There was a glitch within that middleware that ended up causing 18,000 ASNs to generate and send out. Now we're looking at a number of different ramifications, right? One, you've just sent an absurd amount of data that's flowing over the network and being charged for. Secondarily, what is the impact of sending incorrect ASNs to your customer and the chargeback ramifications there? All of that mitigated with our platform because it's a direct touch point and we're validating the exact data in BC coming right into TrueCommerce. Again, streamlined data, transparency, and clarity of data from start to finish. I think we covered the importance of kind of the ability to have touch points and visibility to the EDI solution. I'd love to kind of transition into our last myth here, myth number 10. And from my perspective, I think it's something that over the last couple of years has been a big point of conversation for our teams with our clients. And I think will continue to be one that's really, really important. And thinking about our final myth here that we're talking about today, APIs are replacing EDI. It's a constant point of conversation. And Gina, I think what I'd love to do is get your insights of this first, thinking about not just EDI, but kind of just your exposure in the Microsoft space over your many years in the channel and kind of the conversations you're having around this.
I think we can all agree APIs are powerful, right? They are offering real-time communication between systems, and they're great for certain use cases. But that certainly doesn't mean that EDI is going away. EDI is still the global standard for high volume structured B2B transactions, especially in industries like retail, logistics, and manufacturing, right? So it's reliable, it's governed, it's widely adopted. But what I would say is really happening is that APIs and EDI are becoming complementary. Some workflows, they really do benefit from real-time API connections, while others are better suited for a more structured batch nature like EDI, right? So the best approach isn't choosing one over the other. It's building an architecture that leverages both depending on the business need. I wouldn't say it's either or, I would say it's yes and.
Fantastic. Reed and Chris, maybe I'll open up to you both, get your thoughts around that when we're thinking about where does this middle ground of EDI and API come into place?
Yeah, I'll start, and Reed, let me know what you're thinking after this as well. But API, whenever I hear API, I immediately think APIs certainly have their place, right? Our EDI integrations with D365, we want that to be an API direct integration. But EDI is really the communication protocol. And when I just think about really where it comes from, where it got its footing, coming from the retailers downstream, it exists and it is kind of the standard because it's easy and it's repeatable, especially for, when you think about thousands of vendors and the need to be able to connect to them quickly, needing the vendor to buy in and be able to receive that communication protocol, send it back to you, it's an easier path. And APIs, if there's a huge shift to that for large vendors, large retailers, it could create a little bit of friction in the vendor community as it's just a little bit more complicated to install.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. Just fun fact here, I started at TrueCommerce in 2014, so 11 years. And even 11 years ago, a lot of times I'd be speaking with a customer or a prospect, and they'd say, oh, well, why do I need this? EDI is going away. It's such old technology. Well, here we are 11 years, and it's going strong. And I can promise you, although, there are some big box retailers that are offering, not mandating, but offering API capabilities outside of EDI. It's not going anywhere.
Absolutely, 100%. Love those responses, team. Really do. Gina, I loved how you put it, that it's about complementary functionality, right? How can we take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and kind of serve up that perfect meal when we think about putting it all together? And that's so much of what we focus on here, right? We're constantly working here at TrueCommerce to maintain support for, like what you said, Gina, is the cornerstone of B2B document exchange, but while also focusing on the ever adapting supply chain, right? Making sure that we have the solutions in place to meet our customers' needs, not just for today, but for tomorrow as well. Well, Reed, Gina, Chris, you survived the gauntlet. 10 myths up, 10 myths down. We have debunked and demystified. Thank you to each of you for taking the time to join me in shedding some light on some of these most common EDI misconceptions. I think now would be a great time to dive into some questions.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining the webinar. We hope you really, we appreciate all your information, or we hope you appreciate all the information. We will be on hand at DynamicsCon in a couple of weeks. Be myself, Reed, Tim, Gina, our colleague Lauren, and our colleague Mesa. If you guys have any other questions, please let us know. And lastly, as you heard Gina and Tim say, myths 5, 9, and 10 are their favorite. So if you're interested in learning why, let us know. We'll share that information. Thanks all.